Good morning. We're going to talk about one of the most interesting characters that we're going to encounter in the history of architecture, history of art, history of the world today, and that is Michelangelo Buonarroti, the great Florentine. He's one person I'm sure you have all heard about. We mentioned him briefly the other time when we were talking about work going on under the patronage of Julius II at the Vatican. We had, in one part of the Vatican complex, Bramante building his magnificent project of St. Peter's. In another part of the complex, we had Raphael painting a series of lunettes. Lunette means half moon shaped, so the School of Athens is a lunette. And Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel just next door. And in the School of Athens, we saw that Raphael did two things to honor this great moment of cultural flourishing in the Renaissance. One, he incorporated contemporary historical characters in among the great poets and philosophers and literary figures of Athens. So we have Leonardo, we have Michelangelo, we have Bramante, we have Raphael. And he also took the space of St. Peter's as it was under construction and used that as the setting for this amazing monument to culture. Great painting. I just want to show you Leonardo. This is Leonardo as Socrates in School of Athens. And this is a sketch considered to be a self-portrait of Leonardo. And this is the old 50.000 lire, the old money, with Leonardo on the money. I liked the old money. It was so nice before they got those nasty little euros in. Plus you had like hundreds of thousands of them to buy a loaf of bread, so you felt like you were loaded. And you also have, right here, Michelangelo. And Michelangelo also got on the money. Michelangelo was on the 10,000 lira note, also quite a lot of money. So let's look at Michelangelo, and let's introduce a term to talk about exactly what's going on when we get to Michelangelo. The term mannerism is often used to describe what he's doing. And you would have to say, well, what does that mean? What is a mannerism? And it's maybe a word that you use in everyday conversation. Like if somebody comes in and says, oh, darling, you've got to try some of the, Diet Coke. It's so super. You'd say, just talk to me like a normal person. Stop having so many mannerisms. And that's kind of what mannerism is in art and architecture. It takes conventions of ordinary art and it pushes them to an extreme. So much so that the subject matter almost becomes about the conventions of the medium rather than the content. We'll go through a little history of what painting looks like, and then we'll come back to this painting by Michelangelo, the Doni Tondo, which I think exemplifies a lot of the principles of mannerism. Look at it for a moment and just think if it looks normal, if it looks crazy to you, and then I'll prove to you that it looks crazy. In the world of normal, we have Piero della Francesca's Federica da Montefeltro and dead wife Battista Sforza. And I say these are normal because these are really driven by convention. The convention, even the convention of representing someone in profile, is something that comes down from Roman coins. And that's lucky for Federico because, as we mentioned before, he was a warrior. He was a condottiere and lost an eye and a chunk of his nose in battle. But we have a very, let's say, decorous presentation of the figure and an attempt to represent space, so much so that the figure almost becomes a plane in establishing foreground rather than a fully plastic figure in the round. The job of Federico and the job of Battista Sforza is to convey a certain kind of geometric clarity about what their lineaments are and to set up a ground plane, which is foreground. When we get to somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, we see a different ambition going on. Flat as a pancake, profile, pressed against the picture plane. But when we see the Mona Lisa, there's a posture that we recognize from classical sculpture going on here, and that's contrapposto. That's where the shoulders are going in one direction, the head is going in another direction. There's this torsion in the body that begins to activate the space. So in Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, the smiling woman, Leonardo is doing this, and you see that it's something he's very interested in, because when he paints girl with an ermine, it almost becomes the theme of his painting. This is so great. Girl with an ermine, lovely girl, lovely ermine. But look at how the ermine twists. Maybe this is just what ermines do. Are any of you weasel owners? Show of hands for everybody who has a weasel. People keep them as pets. I don't know why. But a fancy word for weasel is ermine. And this girl has a weasel. And there's something about this little snake-like rodent that twists its body and assumes a kind of contrapostal stance. And girl with an ermine is more or less imitating the stance of her little pet. So shoulders radically in one direction, head radically in the other direction, hips in another direction, twisty, twisty, turny. And you would think nothing could be more complex in terms of how a figure is positioned in space than Girl with an Ermine by Leonardo. And then you come to the Doni Tondo by Michelangelo. Doni, that's the name of the family that paid for this. They're the patrons. And Tondo is just the name of a round painting. So this is a round painting paid for by the Doni, hence the Doni Tondo. And the subject of the Doni Tondo is more complex than Girl with an Ermine. Girl with an Ermine has as its subject Girl with an Ermine. That's not complex. What exactly is the subject of the Doni Tondo? And on one level you might say, it's a conventional subject. It's a holy family. We've seen holy families before. We have the Virgin, we have the child, and we have Joseph. And that seems fine. But what exactly are they doing? I mean, what is happening? You know, you recognize in the posture of the Madonna something akin to the Girl with the Ermine, but on steroids. Look, legs pointing in this direction, arms pointing in this direction. She is like a corkscrew of a woman. And she's not simply posing to activate space, but this is how she holds her baby. Does anybody here have children? Could you try this at home with your child? How old is your child?
21 months.
Yeah, you could do that. So get your knees going in one direction, get your arms pointed in another direction, hold the baby up, give me a photo and I'll give you 5 points, okay? And I'll show it in lectures from now on, because my hunch is you're going to have a harder time doing it than she does. What's going on here? And in fact, you might even say, where is Joseph? What is happening? And what's the subject? So in part, it looks like Michelangelo is inspired by the tondo, the idea of this round frame, to begin to create a composition that doesn't do what these Renaissance compositions do. Nail the center, subdivide it, get diagonals going through it, or make a triangle, but rather somehow activate spatially the idea of a circle with this overturning and upheaval. So if we're at all comfortable with the Virgin hoisting the baby up to Joseph, you have to ask other questions about this. And that is, why are there so many naked people near the Holy Family? This is not usual, by the way. I don't know how schooled you are in Christian iconology, but usually the Holy Family stays far away from naked people. So what could this mean? What is Michelangelo trying to represent? Why are the naked people so tiny? And who is this little guy creeping on the Holy Family? Any takes on that? Yeah. Are they meant to represent something angelic, like the Naked Angel Club?
No.
Sorry? Well, that's an idea, and I think that's a nice idea, because when we talk about Neoplatonic thought, we say the human body is beautiful, the human body is reflective of divine order, and to gaze on the human body, you're gazing on something perfect. I would say that's one possible reading. Did you have another one? Yeah, that is not an angelic little baby over there. He's coming out of the ground. He's got something over his shoulder. Luckily, I always show you images with so many pixels that there's no possible way you can know what it is. I mean, it might be Cupid. It might be a little arrow over his shoulder. And Cupid might be talking about, I don't know, love in a pagan sense. It might be John the Baptist, cousin of the Christ, who would have been maybe this age when Jesus was this age, and who is typically represented by wearing wild animal skins to represent the time that he spent in the wilderness. So it's an ambiguous figure. It's really an ambiguous figure. And it kind of locks in to the triangles, or the X's anyhow, that are going on in here. Any other takes about the Naked Angel Club? Yes? Are they mutants? Did you say mutant? Muses. I like the Holy Family and the mutants better. I think that's a good theme. Are they muses? Well, I think you're onto something. I think Jesus historically overlaps the time of pagan antiquity. And so we're looking at something that seems to represent the culture of pagan antiquity, the pre-Christian Roman civilization, of all of these heroic classical nudes in their landscape, And here we see something else. So this act of overturning, this act of heaving up Jesus, elevating Jesus, is a kind of representation of overturning the old order and instituting a new order. But it's a bizarre painting. It's a bizarre painting because of the things that it puts together, really complex iconological program. Look, what's this about? Oh, I know, Federico da Montefeltro. What's this about? Boy, it's hard to know. And you can even say there are things about the space of the painting that are as confusing as the subject of the painting. You know, radical foreground, slam these people against the foreground and whoosh these people back in such a way that the actual scales of the people are ambiguous. And if you think about the representation, say, in medieval sculpture, like the carving of a door panel, you'd have a large Christ and tiny little Last Judgment people waiting to be either put to heaven, purgatory, or hell. And it almost looks like that kind of representation of different scales are going on here too. But look at what a little classical nude we have here. And you know, it's really hard to say whether this figure is a kind of Bacchus or a kind of Cupid or a kind of Christ. Or is this figure all three of those things at the same time? And that's mannerism. Mannerism is making dense the iconological program so that you can barely figure out what's going on, so that one meaning begins to support and simultaneously cancel out another meaning, and that it's just loaded. Mannerism also has to do with this complex spatial construction. Frequently in mannerist stuff, you see this game of, let's say, the viscosity of the picture plane. Stuff smooshes to the front, stuff whooshes to the back, and you get very strange scale readings that happen in there. Just to show you again how odd the Doni Tondo is, I'm just showing you other people have been able to represent a similar subject matter in a much, much more contained way. This is Giotto in 1310, one of the late Gothic foundational figures for the early Renaissance. And here we have the Madonna and the Christ in a throne, in a landscape that is, let's say, denatured, out of this world, not trying to represent this world, gold leaf background. By the time we get to the Botticelli, a couple of differences are going on. One, the niche that the Virgin is in looks like architecture. It doesn't look like the flat space of heaven. It looks like architecture. And there is a kind of psychological complexity going on between a baby that looks like a baby and the Virgin that looks like a woman who lives in this world. And here we have an early Michelangelo, really done when he was maybe about 15 years old. And compare this with stuff that you did when you were 15 years old, just to make you realize that, yeah, you're as good as Michelangelo. You both did good things when you were 15. The Madonna of the Stairs, where again, even here, even at this early moment in Michelangelo's career, he's doing strange things. He's taking a license. He's doing things that you have not seen before. Look at the posture of the baby. There is this twisty baby going on. There is also this Hercules baby going on. And the Botticelli baby, I think, is a pretty convincing, pretty naturalistic baby. But this baby is more about representing this kind of muscled torso that a little Hercules would have. So Michelangelo is playing strange games here too. But by the time he gets to the Doni Tondo, he's really let loose. And you can see that again and again when you look at Michelangelo's take on conventional subject matter. David was the emblematic figure of Florence. Florence self-identified with David. David and Goliath, the story. And here is Donatello with his sword, with his foot on the head of Goliath. This is one of the great Quattrocento artists. And the Donatello gets it right, let's say. He gets the contrapposto, he gets the classical nude, he gets the Easter bonnet, he gets everything that you associate with David. Let's say this is a helmet, right? And there's a balanced repose to this. This is also a classical moment to represent. It is a moment after the action, after the completion of the action, where the full cycle of the anticipation and the completion of the event have been realized. Here we have Michelangelo's David. And I'm sure you know this one too. He's got his sling over his shoulder. He's about to act. He's contemplating the act. So there's the tension of incompleteness going on in Michelangelo's David. And this idea of moving away from repose and balance toward tension and anxiety seem to be themes that are played out in mannerism, both in art and in architecture. A couple of things to say about the David is that it's an astonishing work for a lot of reasons. It was carved in a block of marble that was expensive to quarry, this kind of, I think, 18-foot tall block of marble that had been brought to Florence. It was a very narrow proportion for such a tall block of marble. And another sculptor hacked at it and said, whoa, there's nothing that can be done with this. The proportions of this block of marble are so strange that there's nothing to be done with it. You know, chop it up, make fascia for buildings. And Michelangelo was given the task. And Michelangelo found a way to position this figure in this narrow piece of marble. And even in this figure, there are all these distortions going on, like giant head, giant hands. There's a classical repose to the torso, but the veins are popping out of his hands as the blood is pulsing in anticipation of the act he's about to complete. Another famous Michelangelo, also really early in the career of Michelangelo, is this one, which you probably know, the Vatican Pietà. Pietà means the lamentation of the Virgin over the dead Christ. And so here we have the Virgin holding her child. And it's a beautiful work of sculpture, even from a technical point of view. Polished marble, incredibly refined, crisp sense of gravity, pulling the drapery down, and amazing kind of psychological complexity in the engagement between the Virgin and the dead Christ. But something is really odd about this sculpture also. Does anybody see anything odd going on? Yes?
I feel like the size is going much smaller.
You're exactly right. She said she thinks that the size of the Christ's body is really off compared to the Virgin. We could do a demonstration in class of having one of the young women in the class take a large 33-year-old man and sprawl him out on her lap. I think you'd probably find something more like this, right? And this is Perugino's Pietà. It's a painting. And look, we have basically 3 or 4 people supporting the length of the Christ. What's going on? Is it that Michelangelo just got mixed up? Was he unable to get the size right? Was he so interested in making this perfect pyramid that he decided he would sacrifice the size? Or again, was he trying to collapse multiple meanings on the subject? And you think, well, what could the multiple meanings be? And you go back to something that we've seen before. Let's look at this one, like enthroned Madonna and child. This is a common representation of the Virgin and her child. The child on the lap, the Virgin seated, a triangular composition. We get it in Giotto, we get it in Botticelli. We don't quite get it in Michelangelo because he's nuts. But we get it in the typical topos of how this is composed. And if you look at the Pietà, it is more the standard position of Virgin and child. So what is being represented here is not simply one moment in the life of Christ or the life of the Virgin, but this whole arc of birth and death. And it's amazing. Also, if you look at the face of the Virgin, you'll see that she looks really young. There's no way that this is the mother of an adult child. And part of that also has to do with the idea that she is being represented in 2 modes. She's being represented as the grieving mother of the dead child and the virgin mother of the baby. Oh, Michelangelo, you're so clever. And the only way he can pull this stuff off is by distorting stuff like crazy. There's no way that keeping the sizes normal will allow him to have this kind of symbolic and emotive power. Michelangelo does not play by the rules. And he's a really interesting figure because of that. Because everything we've been looking at so far has been people trying to recover the rules from antiquity, trying to figure out the formula, and trying to apply the rules. And suddenly we have somebody like Michelangelo who realizes that by breaking the rules, you can actually make more meaning happen and get more emotional power out of it. This is the Pietà. This is the idea of grieving the dead Christ. This is a theme that Michelangelo came back to again and again in his work. How about this one and this one, late Pietàs? This is kind of amazing. This is almost the opposite in terms of its expression about scale that we had in the Vatican Pietà, where the Christ is overwhelmingly large and overwhelmingly heavy. The legs of the Christ are not liberated from the stone, as though all of the earth is pulling him down. And these figures are desperately trying to hold him up. And the same sort of thing is going on here too. You know, in these classical paintings, we would see things like a center line, creating order. And here we have as our center line the heavy arm of the dead Christ, pulling things down. And look at the scale of these figures, and who does this look like, for example? And the answer is, it's a self-portrait of Michelangelo. He includes himself in the representation as Joseph of Arimathea. I've included that 10,000 lira note here to prove who it is. So what Michelangelo is beginning to discover here in these later works of sculpture is that materiality matters. There's something about the Vatican Pietà that is all about mastery of the craft. It's all about making marble shine like alabaster or like skin. And as he moves forward, he realizes that there is something also incredibly powerful about the relationship of the figure to the block of stone that it came from. It's almost analogous to the creation of Adam and Eve from the mud of the earth. And so he begins to not simply play with engaged figures, but play with deliberate rustication of these figures. Like look at this, hacking it up, denaturing the face. And here's another Pietà. This is one that Michelangelo kept in his studio for decades and would constantly come back to and work at again and again. And Michelangelo lived to be almost 90. He lived to be about, I'd say, 89, which is a hugely long lifetime for that period. The sensibility that he begins to reprise as he keeps coming back to the Rondanini Pietà is one that seems almost Gothic, right? That there's something about denying the weight of these figures. There's something about eroding the physical beauty of these figures that is more powerful, or as powerful, as the extreme beauty that he saw in things like the David and the Vatican Pietà. Really amazing looking stuff. One might say part of Michelangelo's taste for the figure that's not fully liberated from the stone could have to do with the difficult history he had with Pope Julius and the Julius tomb. We mentioned last time that Pope Julius commissioned Michelangelo to do this colossal tomb with over 30 figures, 30 sculptural figures. Michelangelo quarried the stone, and he was in the midst of working on this stuff, and the commission stopped. So you had a lot of figures like, say, this one, Atlas, who is trapped in the marble. And Atlas, the mythological figure, has as his burden holding up the earth. And so the idea that there is this perfect contrappostal classical torso caught in the earth, holding up the earth, head not quite liberated, becoming the earth, is pretty powerful. Or here we have these various slaves, like bearded slave or rebellious slave, some of which are still caught in the marble in a provocative way. Let's look at this sensibility that Michelangelo has shown us and see how it applies to architecture, this interest in playing with scale, this interest in disrupting syntax, or the usual way that things are combined, this interest in material. So Michelangelo Florentine began his career in Florence. He began his career as a sculptor in Florence, and in a very, very particular way. I think I might have mentioned this before, that after the Black Death, there was only one sculpture master left in Florence, this old guy called Bertoldo. And the Medici, Lorenzo de' Medici, wanted to keep these traditions going, or wanted to advance these traditions in a Renaissance sense toward recovering what was classical. He asked the masters of the sculpture studios and the painting studios to send their best students to live in the house with the Medici and to be present at these discussions with the Platonic Academy. Michelangelo trained as a sculptor, but also had this very classical education going on. And so a lot of his early commissions are Medici commissions. We see here an aerial view of the Church of San Lorenzo, the Brunelleschi church that we looked at earlier. You can see the transept and the nave and the crossing. And this is a big lumpy thing from later on. But there are a couple of Michelangelo projects that are present here. One is this thing, which is a library, the Laurentian Library, called Laurentian because it's at San Lorenzo. And here on the opposite side, tucked in the corner, the new sacristy. We looked at Brunelleschi's old sacristy, and matching that, you have the new sacristy. Here's a plan to show you where everything is. Brunelleschi's church, old sacristy, Brunelleschi, new sacristy, Michelangelo, and the Laurentian Library. Great. Here's the plan of the Laurentian Library, and it's on the upper level of the cloister attached to the side of San Lorenzo. So that seems like not the most glamorous place. You walk up a flight of stairs, you find a little door, and in you pop. And what do you pop into? I mean, what you might notice immediately is there's something strange going on in terms of the scale of those stairs for the scale of the vestibule. They completely fill it up. And you might even say there's something strange about the height of the vestibule. This is a strangely crowded space in plan and expansive space in section. So you're simultaneously squished or pushed to the margin by this giant stair, and at the same time you feel the release into the vertical. Also, you're entering in this direction. You're entering from the side. And that's really quite odd also, given how frontal this is. And there are all kinds of little wobbles here that begin to respond to the notion that people might be coming in from the side, but they are deflected. Here's an aerial view of what that stair looks like. Here's the vestibule, and here's the stair. Really fabulous. And things that are fabulous about it is that it seems to have this kind of wonderful rhythm of these landings that are allowing you to kind of pace yourself as you move through the space, but it also seems to have the property of simultaneously allowing you to move forward and repelling you as these rounded stairs seem to push you out and move you out of the space, kind of amplifying this sense of discomfort or crowdedness. The building gets even odder if you look at the way the walls of the vestibule are articulated. Of course, this is a tiny little baby-sized slide, but so what? You guys are good. You can't really see anything there, but maybe you can see them up here, which is to say Michelangelo is playing a game with the wall and the column. And this is a game that's been basically begging to be played for a while. As we've seen that the Greeks liked their trabeation pure. They understood that the column is structural. By the time you get to the Romans, you get this ambiguity about what is the structure and what is the ornament. You get walls with pilasters, walls with engaged columns. What's doing the work and what's not doing the work? And so what Michelangelo does at the Laurentian Library is he begins to position the column in the wall in a really kind of critical way. He carves niches in the wall and sticks columns in the niches, and then supports the niches with brackets. Wall and column are simultaneously vying for dominance here, and it's not clear who's winning. This technique that Michelangelo is using here in articulating